Journalists Roundtable is a half-hour discussion with Pennsylvania journalists about the week's top political news and current events. Journalists Roundtable is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Phil Beckman. Today we're joined by Katie Bernard, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Marco Cerino, City Hall and political reporter with the Philadelphia Tribune, and Stephen Caruso, Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. Stephen, next Tuesday, November 4th, is Election Day. What will voters be voting on?
A wide swath of things. I mean, top of the ticket are judicial elections. Those statewide races in particular are something that's gotten a lot of national attention, big money, and have big stakes for the state's voting laws, redistricting, abortion, tons of things. But beneath that, I mean, local judgeships, which have a huge say on criminal justice systems, how you're treated if from a traffic stop to evictions to, civil cases. Local DAs, bunch of them are on the ballot, sheriffs, constables, even depending on where you are, and then township commissioners, school districts, mayors. All of the above are, important roles that have a lot to do in the day-to-day governance that people really encounter. We talk a lot about the federal government, we talk a lot about the state government, both of whom in Pennsylvania at least are, currently not functioning super well. But, when you look at local governments, when it comes to roads being paved, schools being open, a permit getting out to, let you, have a fire in your backyard to get rid of some trash. I mean, this is all stuff that, is done by the local offices that are, many of whom are on the ballot come next week. So, big races with a lot of import for people's day-to-day lives.
Katie, in your reporting in the Philadelphia suburbs, what types of races are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, it's, there's obviously a ton of races in the burbs, a lot of, smaller level township races, but the really interesting ones I've found have been the criminal justice races out in Bucks County, where you have a sheriff who has really aligned himself with Trump, who has partnered his agency with ICE, who is up for re-election, against a Democrat, Danny Seisler, who has essentially made the pitch that he wants to take politics out of the office. And that race has been really coupled with the district attorney's race between Jen Shorn, a veteran prosecutor out in Bucks County, and Joe Kahn, who folks may remember from his run for AG last year. Additionally, in Delaware County, you have a county council race where Republicans are really hoping to regain a foothold in county government after they've been without representation for 5 years now. And they're focusing less on the national issues than we're seeing in Bucks County and more on those local taxing measures and the increases in property taxes that we've seen under Democratic leadership in Delaware County.
Marco, are you getting a sense as you're doing reporting that voters are paying attention, that there's a sense of great stakes in these elections?
So it's really interesting following this DA's race. This is usually the lowest turnout we get in Philadelphia when it is the district attorney and the city controller's race. If you get over 20%, it's a short miracle. Right now, Larry Krasner is getting a lot of attention, not just for his policies, but particularly with the Kata Scott case and how his office has handled it. Pat Dugan, his challenger, who lost the Democratic primary but earned enough write-in votes in May to run as a Republican, although he says he's staying a Democrat, is challenging him on that and bringing in national attention from Andrew Yang to Dwayne Dog the Bounty Hunter Chapman, taking interest in this and also the Ellen Greenberg case.
Stephen, you were writing about the judicial retention races. Can you kind of talk about who's on the ballot for retention and what does that mean?
Yeah, so 3 Democratic justices elected in 2015, Christine Donahue, Kevin Dougherty, and David Wecht, all were elected as Democrats that year and have been, they flipped the court at that time and have been the bedrock of a liberal majority on the court, a 5-2 majority that has ruled on a number of key cases in that time. We're talking about environmental rights amendment, backstopping the idea that protects Pennsylvania's right to clean air and water. We're talking about redistricting, tossing out a Republican map as a unconstitutional gerrymander, and then implementing their own map, that latter part being something Republicans really didn't like. They upheld COVID restrictions during during 2020. They also have backstopped the state's mail-in ballot law, overturning a lower court that found that law had been unconstitutionally implemented, and then lots of other things. I mean, on medical malpractice suits, on paid sick leave, on gig workers' legal status. So a ton of big issues have been decided uniformly, for the most part, in favor of, I would say, a liberal interpretation of the law. There's debates over how well the law has backed up that reasoning. I've sometimes heard that people think it's been well reasoned. Other times, on some of the more politically charged issues like redistricting, folks haven't been as happy. But this is to say that you add up the impact of all these cases, and Republicans have wanted to flip back this court. I had one operative tell me this race has been circled on his calendar for a long time at the beginning of the year. And that's shown. A lot of money has been coming in. Retention is not a typical race where a justice has an opponent, they have a party underneath them, you're voting for X or Y. Voters are being asked to vote yes or no on this judge's record. When you talk philosophically, you've talked to advocates who like this idea of a nonpartisan election. The voter is supposed to go in and think about these judges as just, vessels of legal opinion. Like, how well do they do the job? And the state bar has said all three deserve another term. It's a 10-year term, unless you reach retirement age. But the thing is that it's not really what's happening. We have mailers going out from conservative groups saying, highlighting a lot of those rulings I mentioned, particularly COVID, particularly, concerns about the gerrymandering ruling. Then you have Democratic groups and Democratic-aligned, liberal-aligned groups pouring money in saying why people should support them. If there were to be a no vote on any of these justices, they would immediately be kicked off the court and they'd be replaced in a special election come 2027. There could be an attempt to replace them by appointment, but considering there's no state budget, I am doubtful of that. But look, big implications of this race, as control of this court dictates a lot when it comes to the 2028 election. It dictates a lot when it comes to redistricting potentially. And it's really been it's been a big money affair, as a lot of judicial races around the country have been, as that branch of government gets increasingly politicized.
Worth tossing into, Stephen, when you're talking about the issues that are coming up in this, Democrats' main reason, at least in their mailers and their advertising, for keeping these current justices is abortion access, which we've seen in Wisconsin, we've seen in a lot of states that have had these sorts of judicial races, but this is a court that has not affirmatively yet established a right to an abortion in the state of Pennsylvania, but all three of these justices have indicated that they are open to it and would like to see a case come before them where they can enshrine that right.
Katie, you've been following one of those justices, Kevin Dougherty, and what's it like to walk around with him as he's knocking on doors in the city?
Yeah. That was, back the weekend after Labor Day, I went knocking doors with Justice Dougherty and his son Sean. And it was such an interesting dynamic, because you go out door knocking with politicians. They're used to reporters out door knocking. They're used to having these conversations, and they are making their very partisan pitch. If he said it once, he said it three times. Justice Dougherty kept repeating, justices shouldn't have to canvass, while we were out on the trail. And it was a dynamic where he wasn't really talking to people at the doorsteps about the cases. He was talking to them about, we've been endorsed by the bar. This is a nonpartisan race. Please keep us. And those conversations stayed pretty short, with, a couple exceptions where folks engaged a bit more, and one very interesting one where guy that appeared to be, a union guy, asked Justice Dougherty if his brother was Johnny Dougherty, and lamented with him that he missed the role his brother played in the unions before he was convicted.
Marco, do you get a sense in the city that since Justice Dougherty is from Philadelphia and has that local connection, that there's increased support for him there?
Yeah, Justice Dougherty has a huge family connection here. In fact, I believe it was Seamus Dougherty who was the infamous judge at the Vet back in the 90s when people were getting arrested for all sorts of shenanigans at Eagles games. But the Dougherty name is still very strong. Sean has done a strong job in his first term in the House here. One of the big things we've seen too is a push by the city commissioners to ensure that folks vote up and down the ballot. One of the initiatives we saw this week from Lisa Deely, the vice chair, who was former chair, reminding people to go out and actually look at the races, get the information. You'll see videos on YouTube and other, public services that they're doing to ensure that, because the retention races don't get as much attention, so some people miss the votes. Locally also today, we'll see Ken Martin, head of the DNC, in the city, meeting with ward leaders and also working at a phone bank, we've been told. He was out in Lancaster and the western part of the state, I believe, yesterday, and he's going to be going to New Jersey and Virginia this weekend to get involved in those governor's races. But this is getting a lot of attention nationally, and it is getting a lot of attention locally.
Yeah, jumping off of what Marco said, I think this is a race that has gotten a lot of national attention because, as we've talked about, judges are getting more politicized. We're looking at the federal government on the state level as well. They're asked to make high profile rulings on things that dictate, the balance of power within the state, redistricting, gerrymandering. So the money is reflecting that too. Spotlight, I did a story with my colleague, Katie Meyer, that was on the fact that a lot of this money too, as Katie mentioned, judges can't say, I'm for this, I'm against that. It goes against state law on how these races are conducted. So that means since they're sort of hamstrung in how they can talk, it means a lot of other people talk for them using big checks that often come from hard to chase dark money groups or nonprofits. Lots of spending that's opaque and hard to tell, and it lets them message on a lot of different things. For instance, we've seen I've been getting constant mailers talking about all sorts of things. Sometimes it claims to be a nonpartisan group, and then you look it up and it's funded by a liberal billionaire, or messages to voters saying protect women by term limiting the courts, and that's funded by a Republican billionaire. So that has been the dynamic of this race, and I think that really shows the amount of attention that is on this race because of the power that's at stake in these retention races.
And I think a big part of the power at stake too is Pennsylvania is a swing state. These justices will make important decisions about state election law before 2028 and before 2026. And there's no ignoring that these groups, especially outside Pennsylvania, are looking for judges that will help ensure voting laws are most favorable to what they want for their voters.
Stephen, are there reporting requirements for these groups when they're funding ads for candidates?
So the state's independent expenditure law, so this is basically super PAC spending. It does require that groups will report to the Department of State saying, what they've spent, how much, and how they've spent it. But from reporting with my colleague, Katie Meyer, we found that it seems like it's kind of scattershot. Some groups report early and often. Some just seem to wait until the last minute and drop a bunch of filings at once. This is mostly self-reported information. I've even gotten anecdotal reports that DOS is sometimes a little slow in how they get it into the system. For instance, we reached out to one group that we knew was spending on digital ads, told them we haven't seen you in the system, and then they shared that they had filed reports on Friday and they weren't reflected yet. They might be reflected as of this morning as we're recording, but it just kind of gets at this because this money is such a fire hose. I believe the Inquirer and other groups have reported that TV tracking data finds millions in TV buys alone on this race, but when you look in the DOS system that is supposed to reflect this, you find a paltry 1.6 million as of Tuesday. It might have gone higher, but the numbers don't add up, and a lot of that just because our system does not seem well designed to capture all of this flood of independent money.
Stephen, are there any penalties if they're not reporting properly?
It's about, I think, $10 per day with an extra $10 leveled for the first 6 weeks. I mean, I think viewers can do the math. If you're spending $1 million on TV ads, what does $100 in fines to the Department of State mean? That seems like a rounding error.
Marco, you spoke recently with State Representative Andre Carroll. What district does he represent, and what did he say about the state budget impasse?
So I believe he represents the 200th district. I know he took over for Stephen Kinsey, and that's in Germantown. So I'm trying to remember the numbers. Stephen can probably beat me to that. We spoke a lot about where things are. He's coming in as a first year guy. He's coming in representing, a mixed district, let's say, in terms of the folks who live there, predominantly Black, but, a mix of working class and, professionals. We talked a lot about what he's doing to engage people at that level. He said, it's been difficult because people are frustrated with government. They're certainly frustrated with a budget that's now over 4 months overdue. But we talked a lot about where things are in the Black community. It was a really interesting discussion, get a chance to pick his brain a little bit.
Stephen, with the budget being so late, are you able to discern what specific issues are the sticking points?
It's so this week we've had, when I say breakthrough, I simply mean that in the sense of people seem to be talking. There were 3 straight days of all 5 parties, so we're talking majority, minority leadership, and the governor all meeting in the governor's office in the Capitol. So that's a breakthrough in the sense of people are talking. That's an important part of solving any sort of form of impasse. Issues on the table, everyone's been real quiet. The rumor mill of Harrisburg, which is usually pretty light at times like this, has been subdued. But there's been no comment from legislative leaders as they left that office to reporters on old-fashioned stakeouts. But with that said, look, this has always been about the level of state spending. The state right now has pretty flush cash reserves, but those are going down because there's a lot of requirements to keep up spending on Medicaid, on education, demands from folks. I mean, there's a court ruling that found that the state schools were unconstitutionally underfunded and that need to be rectified. Democrats are saying that means more spending. Republicans are saying that means school choice. That blew up the 2023 budget. So, that's a big thing on the table. How do you, figure out the right levels of funding for education, for transit, for et cetera? What is actually, how you get to a level of spending that uses some of the money that is there, doesn't put too much of a hole for future budgets, and then leaves everyone to kind of fight another day and hash out what to do next, is kind of why this has been such a hard budget. Everyone's been emphasizing there's just deep ideological differences, and the governor himself has kind of put it as a 3-party negotiation between himself trying to referee between Senate Republicans who want less spending and House Democrats who've been supportive of more spending. And people are talking again. Good starting point, but it's unclear how quickly they'll come to a resolution. But again, I can't emphasize enough how much getting everyone in the one room has kind of made the mood shift in the Capitol.
Katie, when you're talking to local government officials, is the budget impasse something that they bring up as a concern of theirs?
Oh, absolutely. At this point, the counties have to start building their budget for next year. There's a very clear requirements that they have to have a budget done for 2026 by the end of 2025. And they're trying to build those right now with uncertainty about what federal funds are going to come in and uncertainty about what state funds are going to come in. Within the collar counties, for the most part, they've been able to backfill what they're missing from the state with reserves. But that is getting costly. And in some counties, Delaware County especially, they've had to stop or slow down payments to some of the social services agencies that they work with, which is, at this point starting to result in, real shortening of the strings at homeless shelters and fewer people that they're able to serve. And that's a dynamic that will only get worse as this goes on. And, as we start to see these state budgets come out, not these state budgets, county budgets come out, we're going to see a lot of uncertainty built into them because they don't know when the state will have a budget and what money will be coming down.
Marco, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was going to say, basically, the situation we're in is that, counties, nonprofit school districts, their choices about state money, which are, backfilling a big part of their budget, are they cut services, they use up reserves, or they go into debt. That's kind of the option for them. And, all of those have potential consequences, and particularly debt. You can get money in the short term from a bank, but then you're paying interest on that, and interest payments are going to take up money that could be going to hiring or, raises or any sort of thing that lets you keep your complement, that lets you spend on the necessary services of making sure a kid with a disability is getting care, making sure that, there's an after school program, making sure that mental health clinic stays open or a clinic for people going through addiction stays open. There's a cost to all of this, and it's just been mounting and mounting and mounting over the past 4 months as lawmakers haven't been able to come to a deal.
Marco, how is Philadelphia City Hall responding to the budget impasse?
You're sort of tentative right now in City Hall and City Council. The mayor did say in October that if the federal and state governments stay closed by December 1st, then there's going to be concerns over cash flow. City does have about $1.19 billion in their reserves, which I'm guessing they'd like to hold on to and not have to put out for things. Mayor Parker's been very aggressive about avoiding major borrowing to cover expenses. Granted, the city is going to take out $800 million in bonds over the next 2+ years to handle the home initiative, which is getting introduced today. City Council is taking a look at that budget. It comes out to about $194.6 million for the first year, of which I'm sure will change. But they've been really trying to be Mayor Parker really puts a lot of import into being fiscally responsible. We saw that a lot with the negotiations with the unions this past summer, which included an 8-day strike for the first time since the 80s. But there are concerns, but Kenyatta Johnson, who has previously served in the House, said he's remained optimistic. One of the things that I did notice, and I was asking about this because I don't get to go on these fun stakeouts in the Capitol, is I did ask whether or not these meetings between leadership and the governor will continue when the session days end. And starting as of today, you're looking not until the 17th. So you've got about 2.5 weeks in which either people are going to go home and handle elections, or it's entirely plausible the governor says, hey, let's get on Zoom calls, let's get on conference calls, and let's keep this momentum going.
Stephen, even though the budget's almost 4 months late, legislators and the governor are still holding fundraising events. What is going on there?
Well, politics is a year-round business. Members of the state house have to run for re-election every 2 years. Members of the state senate run for re-election every 4 years. It's scattered. It's 25 every other year. And the governor is up for re-election next year. Elections cost a lot of money. That's only gone up. Inflation hasn't just been on, food and drink and housing and clothes. It's been on how you run races. In 2024, for instance, there were multiple $1 million races, and just for state house, and then I believe there was the most expensive was almost $4 million, if my brain serves me right. So that costs a lot of money. Lawmakers are always raising money. Spotlight has covered this consistently. These fundraisers dot the Capitol on every session day, as there's no laws banning fundraisers on session days, for instance. And those are often attended by lobbyists, by wealthy special interests, by a lot of the folks who care about what happens in the building. There's a connection between access and that, as Spotlight PA has also reported on, that getting into a fundraiser helps you, get to know the lawmakers who you're hoping to ask for their vote at some point. So all of this is to say, this is built into Harrisburg. This is how Harrisburg functions. The fundraiser is going to happen, but we're at about 4 months in that we are at more fundraisers held by my track than days since the budget was supposed to pass, and that's even with 253 lawmakers and a governor. So on the one hand, you could argue just by the numbers that makes sense, but people who have been followed the General Assembly have been saying they think this just shows the lack of prioritization that occurs within our government and our politics that leads to, fundraisers happening up and down State Street and around the country even. The governor went to Nantucket for a fundraiser as he looks at re-election. Senate or House Republican leadership went to a fundraiser in South Carolina, and I'm sure there's plenty more I haven't gotten invitations for. But this is part of the constants of our government, is that it does require a constant flow of money so people can stay elected and they control the agenda. And that means you're going to have things like this happening. But activists who are just saying, we need to get a plan done to avoid penalties for nonprofits and counties and whatnot aren't too pleased.
Marco, we have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to touch on Cada Scott and the situation there. Can you just bring us up to date on what's going on and what you've been hearing?
I've been thinking this. So charges have been filed now, including murder against Keon King. I also noticed that a couple cases against him, at least one case against him, has been refiled. Now he's got a court date next Tuesday, the 7th or 4th. And he's going to be in court over another case. So this could go for a while. Now it is having some effect on the district attorney's race. Pat Dugan's been able to leverage this into more national coverage and more attention over the way that the previous cases were handled, including the one that's being refiled by the district attorney's office, and suggesting that Larry Krasner's leadership has been ineffective and not served the community correctly.
Now, it's this, when you spoke with Senator State Representative Andre Carroll, you spoke with him about the Kata Scott issue. What did he have to say about it?
So this one hit personal to him. Cato lived in his district and was looking to work in his office. So when we talked, he was still, I could tell he was still emotionally raw from the weekend where her body was found. So this had a really hard impact on him. He's a young guy. He's about 31, 32 years old. So Cata's, was a little younger than he is, but being part of that and being a young leader, he has a huge emphasis on this. Now, a lot of the questions I asked were, what can you do about this? He is very set on doing more bail reform. The big question is whether or not cash bail serves the community well. Some people say that, you shouldn't have it at all. There should be just release on recognizance for certain issues, but other people should be remanded. One of the issues with the previous case involving Mr. King was that the DA's office asked for a very high number. They always ask for this $1 below $1 million. So that way, if it's given, the accused is not put into solitary confinement, as has been explained to us. So the judge in the case, the magistrate knocked it down to $200,000 and bail was posted. So people are now concerned as to whether or not there's a reasonable area of it. Or, if the district attorney's office is handling things correctly and has enough leadership. I spoke to Seth Williams about it, and he said that he doesn't believe that there's enough leadership and oversight within these, and people who are too inexperienced are getting these cases and just aren't not ready to handle these opportunities.
Marco, what will you be covering this week, and where can people read your work?
So folks can always go to phillytrib.com, and they can find me on Twitter at Cerino Royale. Sometimes there's stories, sometimes there's commentary on the Eagles, but it's a bye week, so you're safe on that. Although I am very excited to see if my beloved Temple Owls get to 6 wins. This week we'll be covering the election. We'll be looking at some opportunities to help folks with the snap cuts and whatever else happens in this big, beautiful city.
Stephen, where can people read your work?
At spotlightpa.org.
And Katie, what will you be looking at, and where can people read your articles?
Yeah, found my work at Inquirer.com. I'll be doing one last look at fundraising in the Supreme Court race and the relatively quiet school board election season we've had.
Well, our guests have been Katie Bernard, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Marco Cerino, City Hall and political reporter with the Philadelphia Tribune, and Stephen Caruso, Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm Phil Beckman. Thank you for watching.
Full episodes of politics and policy content like the program you just listened to are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Discover other shows like the Capitol Preview, On the Issues, candidate interviews, and more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.